Hey, so today's episode of the vodcast Chatting With series is with Dagmara. Dagmara is an ex-student, so she took her Applied Computing HCI programme and she headed off to work in user experience within a software house. So she's now working in Europe, helping out their UX teams to design new software. So I think this is a really good example of someone who has that technical background that then allows them to work in other jobs that are aligned with programming, but it's not programming as such. So the disclaimer that comes with today's episode is that we were so busy having the conversation, we kind of didn't realise that it got dark. So after a while, you pretty much can't see Dagmara anymore. So we apologise for that. But enjoy, like, subscribe, and all that jazz, and post some comments, and we can chat. Cheers, Susan.
Okay, we're going. Okay, so welcome back. Today I have another ex-student with us who has gone on to work in the field of UX, which I'm super excited about because it is a student who escaped programming. Yay.
That's very
so
true.
I'm going to let you introduce yourself and just give us some background on who you are and what you're doing currently.
Okay, so I'm Dagmara, I'm 24 and I'm from Poland, from Poznań to be specific. I studied computing with HCI in Dundee. Then I did follow the programming path a bit. I even taught kids how to code. After that, I went to do information studies at the University of Amsterdam, and then went back home and started working first as a junior UX researcher, and then as a UX researcher and designer in a software house in Poland.
Awesome. So this idea of coming in to study HCI, what was your experience of computing or HCI before you came to Dundee?
Well, I knew quite a lot about computing as software development, because I was in an academic software development class, computing class in school. So I knew quite a lot about that, but I didn't know much about HCI. All I knew is that I really liked psychology and I also liked computing. Then I knew I'm not going to be a therapist or anything like that. I'm not made for that. So my dad actually told me about UX and HCI, and he was like, oh, this is something for you. And then I looked, and it turned out that at the time, the only bachelor in English that you could do in Europe was at Dundee. So I applied to Dundee. And
so
yeah.
You came for the course rather than the city then, right?
Yeah, I mean, I knew nothing about Dundee or Scotland. I've never been there, so it looked nice.
Well, I live, 1.5 hour drive from Dundee, and I came to Dundee to do an MSc, and 2 weeks before I moved, I came to find a flat. So the same thing happens if you live next door sometimes. What did you think of Dundee when you came? What was your impression of Dundee as a place?
I remember the bus trip from the bus Central Station. What? Seagate? Is that what it's called?
Seagate, yep.
Yeah, and then I remember being on the bus down to the halls, and it looked like in the movies, the old buildings, really elegant, really nice. So I really liked that, and I liked that it was such a small student city, basically. I always felt safe and at home. It was really nice.
Yeah, cool. So you came to Dundee, you were like, okay, made a good choice. But you want to look at, what was your first, do you remember the first time you like did something UXy in the course? Do you remember the first time that you were like, oh yeah, the course is good too?
Well, something UXy was actually with you, Rachel. It was the database class.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
And I think it was the second semester of my first year or so. And then I felt like, okay, this is what I'm here for. This is very cool. And it's like, it was with product design people as well. So
Yeah, that class is such a nice mix of different groups of people.
yeah.
Yeah, you know, we have interior design in that group too.
Really?
Yeah, since you did it too, there's now product design, digital interaction design, and interior design.
Oh,
All in.
wow.
So once you get to physical computing, imagine the sort of stuff that you're going to get from interior designers and smart homes and all that sort of stuff. It's really cool.
Yeah, but my manager recently told me about processing, that it's like a big thing among designers now, not only for database, but also for some installations and just lots of different stuff.
Yeah, like the libraries you can have just like exploded. There's so many, and you can now add so much stuff in the way of sensors and things. So like when you did it, it was probably like, oh, we can get a Connect and we can put the Connect in, and look, you can kind of detect body shapes and things. But now you can put sensors all round, and they use them for environmental sensors, you know, temperature, movement, weight. So they put weight sensors so that when people like walk in a room, there's a light show and that sort of stuff, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I haven't used it since, but maybe need to look back at it.
Yeah, you can see even like if you've not used it since, you'll see even a big difference in the IDE. Like they've added a debugger, they've added a whole bunch of stuff that's autocomplete, errors at the point at which there's actually an error, all that sort of stuff. So all that kind of, you know, things that you expect from a more complex IDE are now finding their way in there, which is really cool.
Oh, the fun times of explaining designers how the code works.
It was so much fun. So processing was a tool that we used, right? I'm just trying to think what other sort of tools or systems you'll have used throughout the UXy part. Axure probably.
At uni.
Yeah.
Yeah, Axure, I think. Then what else was there? Well, we did usability testing for our web. Oh, I think it was an HCI course, and we had to develop a website and then test it with users. But that was no actual tool. I think we just observed people. I can't remember. I know I used UX Pen, but that's just whenever we had to build some sort of a prototype. Yeah.
Yeah. But what was your experience of being in that course? So the HCI course was quite small.
It obviously was 3 people.
UX, yep. But you were part of this bigger thing, which was computing and applied computing. So there's this big spectrum of mathematicians on computing science through to like your more design oriented people a bit like you on the HCI. So what was that like, being kind of at one end of this long spectrum?
Well, it was, I don't know, I didn't feel it that way because I felt like I'm the computing guy as well, you know, well, girl.
Yeah.
But I think the thing I noticed more was just that there were so many guys, because it was mainly computing people, so there was a lot of men, and that was more of a challenge. I think that's also why I did very well
Like-
in all the coding courses, because I was like, I can do that too.
I'll prove myself.
Yeah. But no, HCI class, it was just me, Connor, and a French student, Louise, I think, Louise.
Yeah.
Yeah, the scary part was when we jumped from the first year to second year and we had to meet new people.
Yeah.
That was the tricky part for me. But I had Connor, so it wasn't bad.
It was safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what's interesting for me is like, I get the UX class in 4th year. And I mean, in any course, there's such a spectrum of people, right? But I get the people who are like, oh, I'm really excited to find out everything I can about people. I love people. And then at the other end, I've got people just going, well, I know what we need. I'll just make it right now. Will we use JavaScript? And I'm like, no, we will do no such thing. Stop right now. And that spectrum, I think, was quite evident, like maybe more so than the course, but like the approach and attitude that people maybe had.
That's true. Yeah, that is so true. I remember that. I remember how even with our honors project, a lot of the computing science guys, they did all the wireframes and all the research part after they've actually built the website or the app. Whereas I was doing quite a difficult project with Analu, with the stories at the dentist one. So there was a lot of research and I had to talk to the dentist and I was like doing massive flow charts. And then, there were people who started late and just started from the code and everything else was just made up.
Harsh. But it's interesting though, because I'm now getting more computing science students on that UX class than before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's really surprising me the amount of computing science students that pick it up. And I think it's just that they're like, well, you get the ones that are like, actually, programming's not for me. I want to do something that's not about programming.
Yeah.
But I think some of them really do pick it because they want to be a programmer, but they want to have the language. They want to understand the process that goes before they write the code, which is such a mature outlook. It's so nice.
Wow, yeah, I'm surprised to hear that, but that's very
so
good.
Many are like, I'll never do this, but I just want to know how it comes about. You're like, oh, okay, cool. At least you're honest. Like, you're never going to do it, but
True.
They engage. It's great.
Yeah, I don't remember there were actually that many people who were like on our course who were genuinely interested about UX. I think most of them just went on and did computing in the end.
Yeah, very few actually students go and do UX. Some of them end up in UX after a period of time. So I can think of a few people who've gone off, got junior developer jobs, and then they've kind of switched within their company where there's been an opportunity or whatever. There's been some people who have gone on and done like maybe an MSc in something and then gone into more design oriented things. But I think the trick is marketing your skill set as someone who has the experience of design, but also someone who has the experience of computing. So you bridge that gap, right? You speak both languages and you can explain things to different groups of people.
Yeah, at my work, actually, also talking to my colleagues and talking to other people from the industry, it turns out that people really value UX designers who do have that technical background because it's just easier to understand certain parts Also, if the application is really complex, it's kind of a bit easier to have that in a UX designer, and then UI designers, well, that's a separate thing. They don't need that technical knowledge that much.
Yeah. So do that comparison for me. What's the difference from your experience of a UX designer and a UI designer?
Well, I know. The UX designer, I see it as a person who lays the foundation, sort of, who like sets the structure, the blueprint of something, and UI designers, they take it a step further, and well, they add details like what controls should we use, how it should look. They often also have some, they improve the UX. They have, of course, they have some valuable input, but they're often not as interested in research, for example, and in just this, yeah, basically laying the foundation, you know. So that's the difference for me.
Yeah, that's a nice description, actually, because often you hear people put them into two separate groups. Well, like UX does this and UI does this. But this idea that you're saying, well, you've got UX as the base and then you have layers on top of that, is a much more inclusive version. It's nice.
Yeah, plus the thing is, we noticed in our team that the best designs or products that we produce is when, you know, I, as the UX researcher, designer, do the research part, write recommendations, do wireframes, and then we communicate and I explain what we need, what we want. And they also not only make it pretty, but they also share their thoughts. We discuss what we can improve, and it's, well, the two need to really work together. It's not like you just send off the wireframes and you're like, okay, make it nice.
Yeah, because I think this is the problem for a lot of people, is that people want to get into the UX industry, but they find it difficult to distinguish between all the different jobs. And so I think there's a difference between, like, if you work for a company that does UX consultancy or UX for a specific area versus like a software company, we need a UX person. And so, right? So I think that's really interesting, how different job titles come about.
Yeah, that's actually why I put a researcher and designer in my job title now, because it's like I'm the UX person, so sometimes I do get messages on Slack like, oh, we need some UX.
Please unpack your UX here and go away.
Yeah, it's like, it's not a bad thing. It's just if you work in a smaller team, who's not, you don't have like a UX writer and a UX researcher and a UX designer and a UI designer and a graphic designer. You need to be much more interdisciplinary and do loads of different stuff, like UX writing also, which is a new field now.
Yeah, that's kind of slowly opened up. I think it's like the kind of UX content developer, UX content writer has just kind of like disappeared, and now we just write things. You're like, oh, okay. Whereas like content was much more about like, okay, go and find images, go and find videos, go and find relevant things. It's funny, it just is slowly becoming, like, in bigger places, very, very specific siloed jobs.
Yeah, it is like UX writing. So not only just, but writing microcopy for products is now a separate job. so you write text for buttons and placeholders and all that sorts of stuff, but only companies like Google or Airbnb can afford that.
Yeah, it's so niche. Because where did I see a job advert recently for that? It was like for one of these massive big software people like IBM or whatever. And it wasn't IBM, but it was something of that stature. And it turned out that it wasn't actually a UX writer that they wanted. If you read the job description, they actually wanted someone to write their documentation.
Well,
Then you're like,
so
see,
common.
a company your size, you should know what putting UX in front of something means. It was a very internal, we want to write documentation that everyone understands. And you're like, yeah, that's a software engineer. Like, that's nothing to do with being a UX person.
Oh God, yeah, I see that all the time. And then also there is a different end of the spectrum. I think it's especially popular in Eastern Europe, where they want a front-end engineer who does UX, UI, and writes the front-end code, at least the front-end.
Yes. This is the UX developer job.
Oh, is that a name for
I've
that?
seen this advertised, right? And students will be like, oh, it's a UX developer job. And you're like, yeah, they just want someone who does HTML and JavaScript. Like, there's no UX, it's a front-end developer. Oh, okay. Like, that got so many people early on. Like, small companies who were like, what we'll do is we'll get the person who writes the JavaScript to also make sure it kind of makes sense. We'll call them a UX developer, and that's two jobs.
Yeah.
Two different things.
I think that's disappearing now, but the UX UI designer is still a very popular thing. And I know, I think that's a lot for one person to handle.
Yeah, so much. So now that you're there and you're doing this UX research design position within this software company, what do you think were the most important things that you kind of took from your degree or your experience at Dundee that have helped you in that job?
Oh, well, I feel like it was the very sort of research-based, but also like data-based approach, because when I had my job interview, I had to make an analysis of an application for them and like point out what I think was wrong. Yeah. And the way I was taught in Dundee, I just basically used stuff like Nielsen's heuristics and this sort of actual knowledge, rather than something I think or I read on a blog.
A framework to attach things to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that helped me. And then, I think this just approach to prove everything rather than just say I think something, because I see it with a lot of people in the industry, that people don't really back up their thoughts with any sort of research or reliable sources. And I think that's something we were really, was really emphasized in Dundee. And also I had a lot of just UX HCI knowledge as for the current times, because now maybe more people study UX, but a few years back not many people knew much. So being in Dundee and being taught by you and Annalu, I already knew a lot of terms and people who you should know, even like Nielsen and Norman. So I think that helps you like stand out a bit.
Yeah, cool. Because and I know from my point of view, it's always like, but why do you think that? Like,
Yeah,
why do you think?
exactly.
Are you going to think something different tomorrow? Is this a permanent thought you have, or why? Why do you think that? And I think like that's so important that you can say, because of this experience or knowledge I have, I think this, and it just grounds everything.
Yeah, exactly. And we were taught this approach by you guys, so then that paid off.
Cool. So what sort of advice do you have for people that want to progress into UX? What sort of stuff should they be doing? What should they be reading about? What should they be working on?
Well, I think that, well, firstly, they should be reading as much as possible, but from reliable sources. So like Nielsen Norman, scientific papers. There are a lot of Medium, for example, is one platform, or other blogs, but I would be careful with that, to be honest, and not treat it as a source of truth. And then they should be they should be working on their portfolio, which is like research/design. And it's kind of easy to do when you're in Dundee, because there are quite a lot of projects that require you to do some research or some wireframes. So you can just make sure you do that well, and then you can have it in your portfolio, because no one expects a junior researcher to have, a ton of commercial projects or something. And I think, just read stuff that interests you, like read stuff about people and psychology. I think that's really important, to just try and understand people. And if someone, like you were saying about people who want to know about people, if you don't want to know about people, then don't go into UX, just consider something else.
Yeah. Yeah, so you spoke about a portfolio, and I think this is something that students find quite difficult, particularly students that are coming from a computing background, where creating a portfolio isn't something that they're kind of taught. Like if you come from a design background, you've done a portfolio to get into university. You know what a portfolio is. So how did you sort of learn about what a portfolio was and approach that task of creating your own portfolio for, job interviews and applications and stuff?
Also just on the internet, like if you look at Nielsen Normal or the Interaction Design Foundation, or any other reliable sources, then they're gonna list out for you what sort of projects and how many you should include. So yeah, I know it's difficult because if you want to be a developer, you just need to give them your GitHub link.
Yeah.
For us, it's much more work, but it's not that difficult.
Yeah, and the other thing I see is that people get really, really caught up in making the portfolio look nice. Like it has parallax scrolling and it has animation and it has all of these things and it's got this beautiful color scheme, but it lacks information, right?
Yeah.
What's the balance between the detail on a project versus the kind of beautifying your site or your portfolio?
Well, if you want to go into the UX, it needs to look nice, but more than like the visual design, I would put emphasis on the UX design. So like make sure it's structured well with headings and subheadings. And it has the information, because I mean, if someone who is recruiting you knows what it is, they're not going to pay attention to just visual design. But I was told once a while back, before I had my job, that when you're sending a CV, even a resume, to a design team, it's good to make it a bit fancy, like not just a Word document, because they might look at it and be like, why are they applying to a creative or a design team? Like, they won't fit in.
That's true. That's, you've got to think, and whatever you do, do not pick the template on Microsoft Word that just looks funky. Like, I know what those templates look like, right? Don't just pick one. Like, if you're going to pick one, make it your own a little bit, right? Edit it somehow.
Yeah. So, but yeah, make it look nice, but also make it readable and just have all the information you need there. Yeah.
Yeah. So my final portfolio question is, how did you, in your portfolio, kind of highlight what you did versus what a group did? How did you manage that? Because obviously at Dundee we do a lot of group work, where kind of lots of people have input into something. How much of an issue was that when you were putting a portfolio together?
I don't think it's that difficult, because, well, you obviously need to state that it's a group project, and then you just mention what your role was there, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, see, this is something I see people get really hung up about. Like, they try and do lots of things in their spare time, which is great, but they have all these amazing things that they've done in their degree that aren't making it into the portfolio because they're worried about it being in a group. And I'm kind of the opinion that actually companies want people that can work in a team. Companies want people that have evidence of, you know, I worked with these people and it wasn't a disaster.
Yeah, of course. And I actually read about it as well, that it's not a problem to put a group project as long as you state which part you did. So also if you did the UX or the code and someone else did the visual design, yeah, do not lie that it was your work, but
there's two applications and they both said they did the visual design on this project. Oh.
Exactly.
Oh, that's rough. Yeah. Okay, cool. So what have we got? We've covered coming to Dundee, we've covered going out to work, UX within software. What's been the most interesting part of your like UX career so far? Has there been a moment when you were like, yeah, this job's for me?
Yes, actually, if I think about it, it is client workshops where I'm like, oh, this is something like just brainstorming together, you know, doing user personas and user journey and just throwing ideas at each other. It's something where I really strive. But yeah, then it's the, you know, the design thinking methodology and framework. Well, framework. This is something that I really enjoy, that I've actually never heard of before.
Oh, before you started work?
Yeah.
Yeah, so many versions too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There is the design sprint, but then the design sprint is something that only companies like Google can afford, I think, to spend 5 days on workshops. So it's a bit unrealistic.
Yeah. So what So last year, so I changed the UX class and I taught sprint stuff last year. But what was really interesting is, obviously we had to adapt the sprint methodology because we're teaching over like, what, 8 weeks or whatever, that's not 5 consecutive days. But what was really interesting for me is that having gone through a version of that sprint methodology, that students just picked parts of that and created their own like user workshops as part of their honours projects, which was really nice. And people pick different parts of that sprint methodology to suit who their client was, to suit how many participants they have, to suit how much time they could afford to devote to that sprint method.
Yeah,
so I've
that's
seen
brilliant.
some of them did like half-hour things where they just did like some really, really quick, you know, like how might we notes, or the crazy 8 thing where you draw 8 versions of something. Everybody loves the crazy 8s for some reason. And then some people did like a day, and they got like roughly five days into one, which was pretty cool. But it's fun watching how they pick that apart. Because yeah, you can't say, well, I'm doing an honours project, I need 8 people for 5 days, can you? Like, it's not gonna work.
No,
Crazy.
but it's
Anyway.
great because that's how it's gonna work in the real life.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah. 5 days is a luxury that very few people have.
Exactly.
And if you think back, actually, only the people who did those 5 days, the initial people who used the sprint method, they only did it because Google Ventures paid for it, right? they didn't do it because they had money as a startup company. So,
yeah.
That's fun. Anyway, we are about done. I want to ask one final question, and that question is about Dundee. And I'd like you to share with us your favourite memory of Dundee. I can see the brain going.
Yeah. Well, my favorite thing about Dundee was the labs, the Queen Mother building in general. Because, you know, I had all my friends there, like my closest friends were there. And we were just hanging out, like obviously doing some uni stuff. But we were also just hanging out there, you know, sitting on the sofas, having a Tesco lunch thing, and and then coming and hangover on Wednesdays after Skin Tuesday, of course. So I think just the 3 years spent in the labs with your friends and also doing computing stuff.
Yeah, that's so good, because I think like we try really hard to create that space that people can just make a community, right? And I love it when people tell me that afterwards, like, oh, I made so many friends. Like, that's the plan. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, it was a luxury because no other courses, or well, product design and I think other design people had their space as well, but other courses didn't, and it was such a luxury to have that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much for giving up your time and your evening, because over time you've just got darker.
Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. I wanted to put a light on, but...
No, don't worry about it. It just means that we had a good conversation if it lasted long enough to go dark. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop recording if I find the button. Okay, I'm stopping.